Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We have a few people trickling in. We'll give them a couple of seconds. Thank you so much for being here, for taking time out of your day. Happy Thursday. Happy favorite Thursday of the month. I'm so happy that all of you are here. We are in for such a treat because we are going to be looking at some dream houses today. And I get to play the role of real estate agent for you. Welcome again, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jane O'Neill. I'm delighted that the Chelmsford Public Library and various partners have come together to help to present tonight's program. If you've never been to one of these programs before, my name's Jane O'Neill. I own the company Culturally Curious, and I specialize in putting together art appreciation programs like this one. Um, I have been giving these talks now for the Chelmsford Public Library for several years. This is probably like the 60th talk at this point. Um, so we've got a good thing going, and I'm really happy you're all here tonight. I hope people are in the chat, logging in with where they are. If you feel comfortable sharing that, I always love to see, oh, we got people from New Jersey and Michigan and New York. This is a great cross section here. Thank you, everybody. Oregon, thanks for being here. Maryland. And I did see Nancy Parker, some familiar faces here as well, or familiar names. Janine from Chelmsford, thanks for being here. Um, and thanks for all you do. So again, oh, Lincoln, Nebraska. Emma, thanks for being with us. Okay, so let's get started. Thank you again, everybody, for being here. We are going to be looking at two incredible properties today, places where interior and exterior gardens and grounds, everything comes together to create a palatial estate. And these are two of like the best, I think, examples of architecture from the Gilded Age in the South in America. So maybe you visited them, maybe you haven't. I've tried to build into tonight's program as much as possible some connections back to New England. So a lot of us might have a like a familiar touchstone for these places, but I'm sure some of you have visited them before, and this will be like a nice sort of recalling of those memories. If you have not visited them yet, I'm sure you'll be booking your ticket before the end of the hour. So let me give you a sense in terms of how we'll spend this hour together. We have a very simple program overview today. Essentially, we're going to visit these two sites, Biltmore and Vizcaya. And as simple as that looks, while we're there, like I said, we're going inside, we're going outside, upstairs, downstairs, getting those kind of owner and servant dynamics there too, and looking at the grounds and the gardens, which I always really love as well. There's so much to explore. Let's get started. We're going to dive right in with the Biltmore Estate, which is located in Asheville, North Carolina. And we have these dates here. These are the approximate dates for the building of the estate itself, the building. There are expansive grounds when we're thinking about the Biltmore. So really completing all of this was almost like a generation long process. So here is the Biltmore Estate. What a breathtaking view. I do recall that the architect at one point said something to the effect of like these beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains in the background complement the house very nicely as opposed to the house complementing the mountains. So what we are looking at here is in fact the largest privately owned home in the United States. It's overwhelming in its scale. And of course, it is set with this dramatic backdrop of the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. So it was created for a member of the one of the wealthiest families on the planet at the time. The client here was George Washington Vanderbilt II. And believe it or not, he was a 33-year-old bachelor when he moved into this house when it was finished. Now, just to give us something that's a little bit closer to home for all of you that are watching this from New England, most of us are familiar with the mansions in Newport, Rhode Island. And the granddaddy of them all, the biggest, the most impressive of the Newport mansions, of course, is the Breakers, which is the house that we're looking at here. This was actually designed for another Vanderbilt family member, in fact, an older brother to George Washington Vanderbilt II. And believe it or not, it's the same architect for Biltmore as well. So you could work in different styles, and incredibly, both the Breakers that we're looking at here and the Biltmore were finished the same year. That must have been a year of great relief for the architect. Now, just to give you a sense of scale, because this might be a more familiar property to some, the Breakers is actually 30% smaller than the Biltmore. The Biltmore actually has 3.5 times as many rooms as this gigantic house that we're looking at right here. So let me introduce you to the man behind the Biltmore. This is the client. This is George Washington Vanderbilt II. And he is like not the second, but the third generation of Vanderbilt family wealth, which primarily came from like shipping and railroads and that sort of thing. So this was a man who essentially didn't have to work. He was richer than rich, and he was sort of a bookish fellow. I'm not just saying that because this painted portrait of him features him with the book over here. And of course, this is a portrait by none other than John Singer Sargent. If you're that wealthy, of course, you're going to get a Sargent portrait, right? But but George Washington Vanderbilt was also sort of slight. He was not entirely sickly, but he sort of swayed in that direction. And so while his mother was recovering from malaria, and there was like this widespread fear of tuberculosis, they were out in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, and he thought, this is where I want my country estate, my little retreat from the world, all this fresh air. This is where I'm going to build it. And you can imagine when he moved into the Biltmore, when it was done as a bachelor, he was probably the most sought after bachelor in the world at that point. But he didn't stay a bachelor for very long. Just a few years after he moved in, he did get married to another woman, well, to a woman from another very prominent, very wealthy family in the United States. Her name was Edith Stuyvesant Dresser. This is her on the left in her engagement photograph. What a figure, right? And then over here, a painting of her from just a couple of years later, a portrait by Giovanni Boldini. The name might sound familiar because Boldini actually created a portrait of Jack Gardner at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The Vanderbilts paid about $15,000 for this portrait of Edith way back in 1900. So this was a big chunk of change for them. And this was apparently a happy union between George and Edith because it did produce an heir. They had one daughter named Cornelia. We can see both of the parents here with the baby. And as they say at Biltmore, once this baby was born, the house went from being a house to becoming a home. So let's take a look at this home again, this very modest abode for a family of 3. This is a 4-story house with 250 rooms. Can you even wrap your brain around that? It spans approximately 175,000 square feet. And it has 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, 65 fireplaces, and at least 250 windows. So this is a massive structure, and it was originally set on a huge piece of property, about 125,000 acres of land. It has since been reduced to about 8,000, and that was the Vanderbilt sort of giving land away so that they could maintain a little bit less there. Now, in terms of the name, the Biltmore Estate, it's so fitting, right, for a house that is so oversized like this. It is, in fact, not necessarily a reference to the scale of the house. The Vanderbilt's ancestral lands were in the Netherlands in an area called De Bilt, and then the moor in Biltmore would have been like rolling meadows, like a moor. So it's Biltmore. It's referring to the land. It's referring to the family name there. Now, in order to build such a property on such a work of architecture, on such a piece of property, I should say, uh, Vanderbilt enlisted the talents of two architects, essentially, who were at the top of their games, really sort of at the end of their careers. We have Richard Morris Hunt here on the left, and then we have Frederick Law Olmsted here on the right. Richard Morris Hunt, as an architect, had designed the facade of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He had designed the pedestal to the Statue of Liberty. He was the best of the best. And then, of course, Frederick Law Olmsted was equally matched in his very high profile commissions. He had designed Central Park, he had designed Prospect Park, the Emerald Necklace in Boston. So these were the men, like the best men to enlist in this practice. And even though they were towards the end of their careers, there was this sense that these were like-minded individuals. It was a meeting of the minds when it came to working with young George Washington Vanderbilt II. So these three men really respected each other. They could really kind of commune together very well. So for that reason, George Washington Vanderbilt actually enlisted John Singer Sargent in painting both of these men's portraits, and they still are there at the Biltmore to this day. Now, imagine doing a little construction project at your house and loving your contractors so much that you get a painted portrait of them and you hang that on the wall. I get a sort of a kick out of this, but it really shows how highly esteemed both of these men were, particularly for their contributions to this site. So as we think about the architecture, there were some architectural inspirations for the Biltmore. We're looking at the Biltmore over here on the left. What a photograph, right? With these meadows in the background that are just covered in this mist. Over here on the right, we have a chateau from the Loire River Valley in France. And it was these chateaus that really served as inspiration for Vanderbilt and for Richard Morris Hunt. So this was originally a hunting cabin, a hunting lodge for the King of France. This is the Chateau de Chambord. It's one of the most famous chateaus on the planet. And you can see that these peaked and pitched roofs, this impressive roof line here, it's sort of like a relic of the medieval past, is kind of not perfectly copied over at Biltmore, but kind of replicated in spirit across the pond in America. There was one other important architectural inspiration for the Biltmore, and that was the Chateau du Blois, which is also in the Loire River Valley in France. And at this particular chateau, which shares elements of that roof line that we see over here with this central tower, it also has this prominent staircase that you can see featured on the facade of the building, the interior courtyard facade. And we see something similar over here at the Biltmore. In fact, that staircase is so important and so prominent. I mean, he put it right next to that central tower there. So it's almost like an essential element of the chateau style. So how do you build a chateau in the middle of nowhere? Really, I mean, Asheville was like a small town at the time. It would have been nearly impossible to build something of this scale in such a remote location. But of course, the remoteness was something that had initially sort of inspired the purchase of this land. So it helps if you're a Vanderbilt, and it really helps that the Vanderbilts had this connection to the railroad. So they actually created their own spur off of the main line that went through North Carolina to bring materials out to this location. If you have really good eyes, you can see a little train here in the foreground, because there was millions of pounds of Indiana limestone that were brought to this site, in addition to the elements that were created on site there. They milled many of their own bricks that were used as well, millions of bricks. So it was quite an operation just to construct this building. There were about 1,000 people involved in the construction of it. And like I said, it took about 6 years. In the end, Vanderbilt got just what he wanted. He ended up paying about $5 to $6 million for this house, which seems like a paltry sum, but we're way back in the 19th century, way before the inflation that we know today. In today's money, it would be well over $200 million. To me, that even seems like a very low estimate. So let's not discount Frederick Law Olmsted's contributions to this as well, because he had this magical quality of being able to see into the future. Frederick Law Olmsted knew where you should plant a tree so that 25 or 50 years or 100 years later, it would create a specific experience. So, in this historic image that we see over here on the left, we have this esplanade out in front of the house, giving us this unobstructed view of this impressive facade. And he envisioned that on either side of that esplanade, there would be a double row of trees lining a walkway. And you can just barely see those little saplings that have been planted in the historic photo. And then over here on the right, you can see what that promenade looks like today, this nice shady promenade. So he worked this magic of seeing into the future and planting strategically back in the 19th century in order to create a very lush environment. And essentially, what he did is he sort of looked to European models as well. When you're building a castle or a chateau in Europe, what they oftentimes subscribed to was essentially a hierarchy of landscape. So the idea here is the closer you are to the main house, the more controlled the gardens and the landscape are. So we can see almost like an Italianate garden over here, not too far from the house, not too far from that esplanade. And then out beyond the house, there are these rolling sort of meadows that go into forest land. And this is just a tiny fraction of the land that initially encompassed this entire property. So strict control close by, and then this loosening up. And it's not to say that Frederick Law Olmsted landscaped all 125,000 acres. Instead, he focused on what was closest to the house. And even though something like this meadow that's sort of punctuated by a few trees here and there, even though something like that looks completely natural to us, he knew how to create something that would look natural like that. He knew how to create an experience for us so that we could walk through a constricted space, and then it opens up onto a meadow that's beautifully punctuated by a few main trees. So I can't speak highly enough of Frederick Law Olmsted or his contributions to this. Now, I do just want to point out the building at the bottom of this image here. This is the conservatory at the Biltmore. It's a glass roof structure, and this is where they would propagate a lot of the plants that would then go inside the house. So we need to go inside the house too, right? The first room that we're going to see inside the Biltmore is just steps away from that front door and that central tower here, just off to the right is an enclosed glass space. The ceiling is practically 4 stories high. It's roughly an octagonal space. It is grandiose in every way. And you might be thinking, this looks like another conservatory. It's filled with plants. Well, this wasn't where they would propagate the plants. This is where they would bring the plants when they were in full bloom and most impressive. So they referred to this as a winter garden. And a winter garden was a great place to welcome your guests, particularly on a chilly day. It always feels like summer in your winter garden. I feel like there's a little bit of the Isabella Stewart Gardner idea in that too. We also get the sense of, like, in Victorian culture, there was this huge fascination with rare plants and like the control of plants as well. So this would be a place where you could have your tea, read a book, maybe greet a friend and have an initial sit down. Now, one of the kind of fun and fascinating elements of the Biltmore is this idea of invisible service while you're there. So the house is kind of filled with these corridors and these doors that allow servants to move around without their work being visible. It's kind of like Disney World today, where you don't see staff from, one part of the park walking through another park. That would create this disjointed feeling. And like college attention to their work. So even here in their winter garden, there is a marble top trap door that staff would bring sort of old plants through this particular door, or new plants up through this door, so that they're not walking around the property with anything that needed tending to. This was a way to make the work look invisible. Now, if you're visiting the Biltmores, you're the Biltmores visiting the Vanderbilts, you might be lucky enough to get a dinner invitation, which means they would take you around the corner into the most impressive room in the house, and that was their dining room, their banqueting hall. It feels like you've stepped back in time into like a medieval past here. I know it's hard to tell, but this is actually a 7-story high room with this barrel vaulted wooden ceiling. It's incredible. And this is actually a triple fireplace. Have you ever seen such a thing? Think of how difficult it would be to heat a room this size. You need a triple fireplace. This is also impressive. And then, of course, the decor further enhances the sense of like a medieval banqueting hall. There's Flemish tapestries on the wall. There's taxidermied animal heads as well. And then you have this huge 40-foot long table. And there's 65 chairs in the room. So you could accommodate a lot of people for dinner. Now, I've read that the acoustics are so good in this space, you could sit at one end of this 40-foot table and clearly be heard by somebody sitting at the other end, which just kind of conjured up images of people like saying from one side of the table to the other, like, can you pass the salt? But I think they were really referring to the acoustics of this giant pipe organ that is in the banqueting hall here too. So this is a player pipe organ that was installed in the teen years of the 1900s. And even when you go there today, they'll play a little bit of music for you just to give you a sense of this space. Now, it's a big space. It's a formal space. The Vanderbilts certainly didn't have all of their meals here. This is where you would bring people to impress them, right? And apparently every year on their little daughter's birthday, she would get her birthday party in the banqueting hall. Kind of funny to think about. So the Vanderbilts mostly dined in this room here, which was their breakfast room. And the breakfast room is still impressive as all get out. There's hand-tooled leather panels on the wall. There's all this impressive plaster work on the ceiling up here. The room is like lined with John Singer Sargent portraits of various Vanderbilt family members and other historic portraits as well. I want to call your attention to this corner over here, because what we see is another example of this invisible service that's at the Biltmore. This is a door that's designed to blend in with its surroundings. And of course, this is the door that they would bring you your meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner through this door, clear the plates too. And amazingly, they hung a Renoir on that door. If any of us owned a Renoir, I don't think we'd have it on any sort of service door, right? But that's where they chose to do it. So maybe once your belly's full, maybe you're thinking of a little bit of entertainment, and that might mean going into the library and grabbing a great book. And there is nothing like the library at the Biltmore. I mean, isn't this just the library of your dreams? This is a 2-story tall library. Look at the size of these windows over here. You can imagine like a roaring fire here on a given night. There's all of this sort of bright red furniture. You could curl up with a book here. And there's this abundance of light so that you can read too, although there was plenty of electricity at the Biltmore, even from the get-go. But thinking about light and the access to light in order to read, this room was actually designed around a painting, a mural that's on the ceiling. It's a mural that they had imported from Europe. And I know it's a little bit tough to see, you might have to turn your head here, but it's a mural that depicts the chariot of Aurora. the goddess of light, sort of moving across the sky. So it's all about this access to light so that you can read. And it was this mural that really determined the proportions of this library. Now, I mentioned before, Vanderbilt himself was a bookish man. He loved to read. From a very early on, he began recording every book that he read. He averaged about 81 a year. I don't know if you're competitive, but now I'm like starting to aim for even higher. Um, when he died, he was somewhere north of 3,000 books his entire life, and he could read in 8 different languages. He owned 24,000 books total. This library only housed less than half of them. So in it, we can see this elegant little wood carved spiral staircase that leads you to this mezzanine level where you can access more books. And over here in the image on the right, you're up sort of like in the pulpit there at the top of that staircase, looking down at the library. And maybe you can just barely see that behind the fireplace, there is a door over here. There's actually a door on the other side. There's a passageway that goes behind the fireplace on the second floor. There's a door going all the way through. And that passageway provides access for guests who are spending the night at the Biltmore to go and sneak into the library at any hour so that they could find some entertainment for themselves. That's what people had to do before Netflix, you know. Henry James was a guest at the Biltmore one time, and apparently he was just in the worst mood while he was there. And he said, you know, the library is great and all, but I had to walk about a half a mile to get there. So, let's turn our attention now to that incredible staircase that we saw. That was like, you know, a huge design feature for the exterior of the house. Now we can see what it looks like from the inside. There's this incredible 3-story tall wrought iron chandelier that hangs down the center of that staircase. I think there's something like 72 candles, electric candles in in that chandelier. I wouldn't want to be the person who had to change those. There's more than 100 steps up this grand staircase at the Biltmore. They are all cantilevered. There is no internal support system for those steps. So you have to really trust your architect. No wonder they made this a huge design feature on the front of the house here. And here is a great picture of the bottom of those stairs. I love how they kind of pool out like a little puddle here at the base. And this is Cornelia, the daughter of the Vanderbilts. She grew up, she got married at the house, and then here she is at the base of those stairs. And if you're anything like me, you might be thinking, God, all that money and you still have to walk all those steps every single night up to your room. Well, the Vanderbilts had thought of that. They actually installed the very first passenger elevator in all of North Carolina. So if you're that rich, you don't have to walk up the steps to your bedroom. If you're George Washington Vanderbilt, you have all of the modern technologies and luxuries in your house. You take the lift up to your room. And this is George Washington Vanderbilt's bedroom here. We see more of that very masculine red in this setting. A lot of Baroque carved furniture here too. It's dark. Again, it's kind of heavy. It's masculine. He has this massive 4-poster bed. It's very high up. You need essentially these steps or these pillows in order to get up on it. I think most of you will get a kick out of the fact that his room is lined in gilded burlap. So he's literally sleeping in a gilded room. I mean, he really must have thought of himself as a king in some ways. So he's got a particular aesthetic that he's sticking to. And you might be thinking, well, what about his wife? What did she think of all of this? Well, lucky for her, she got her own room. And Richard Morris Hunt tended to give the ladies of the houses, the grand manors that he was designing, an oval shaped room. You can see that at the breakers as well. This is the ladies' room at the Biltmore, and it's decorated in this Louis XV style, this beautiful purple brocade. There's a lot of this yellow gold here as well. Apparently, Edith Vanderbilt was pretty tall for the time. She was about 5'9". So she got a special sized mattress for her bedroom. I looked into this a little bit more, and apparently none of the mattresses at the Biltmore were a standard size. So can you imagine? You're responsible for the laundry there and you're washing all these sheets, and they have to go back to a very specific room and a very specific bed. 35 bedrooms, right? That's a lot to ask. Now, in between the bedrooms for Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt, there's this oak sitting room, and it's quite a special place. This was sort of like their private apartment within their house, a human scaled space. So they might wake up, and before they go down to their breakfast room, they might sit in here. They might meet with their housekeeper and plan their day. This was a much more intimate space. They wouldn't even necessarily bring their friends in here, although one friend does recall being invited in, and George Washington Vanderbilt shared with him his collection of 16 Rembrandt etchings that he kept in this space here. We can see the desk over here on the left that corresponds to the desk that we see at a diagonal over here in the image on the right. We also see these kind of unusual chairs here that have these big flaps at the arms that can go up and can go down. The Vanderbilts had seen that while traveling through a British manor house, and they loved it so much they had it copied for their house here. So imagine now that you are lucky enough to be a guest of the Vanderbilts. They might ask you to stay over in one of their guest bedrooms. There's so many of them. We don't have enough time tonight to see all of them. This is probably one of the most lush and ornate out of all of these bedrooms. It's another Louis XV style bedroom here. So much brocade, right? But this is a particularly special bedroom because this is also where Edith Vanderbilt gave birth to her daughter Cornelia. And the Vanderbilts were so important and so prominent that this made national news when this baby was born in this room. And we can see the crib over here. There's an interesting little alcove here with a door that leads you down to this kind of sunken sitting area here where you can look out through this huge window at the beautiful property. I have to imagine that would be a great place to bond with your baby. And in fact, Cornelia Vanderbilt, who was born in this room, grew up and gave birth to her two children in this room as well. I guess it has some good mojo. So thinking about being a guest of the Vanderbilts, here's a few people who are visiting the Vanderbilts. We can see George Washington Vanderbilt over here with his prominent mustache. Everybody who visits the Biltmore learns a lot about these big dogs that they loved for pets. Well, sitting right next to him here is Isabella Stewart Gardner. So she might have learned a little thing or two from his aesthetic choices there. And not surprisingly, other authors, including Henry James had visited, Edith Wharton had visited. There were several US presidents that went and stayed there as well. And if you have all of these people coming to your house, coming to visit, you really have to offer them something more than just a library to keep them entertained. They've made this visit to this remote location. So at the Biltmore, there's a whole underground entertainment complex in the basement. This is like everybody's dream house today, right? They have an in-ground swimming pool in the basement at the Biltmore. It's empty now because apparently there were some issues with filtration and also leaking. But look at this. There was electric light inside their swimming pool. You have to really trust your electrician to get in that water in the 1800s. You might notice there's a little diving platform here, and then all of these ropes that are just hanging off of this balcony. That's because apparently a lot of people didn't know how to swim back then, so they could just kind of hang on to a rope and hang out in the water there. The Vanderbilts also had their own bowling alley, which is so cool, so much fun, right? But this is before there was automatic ball return or pin reset or anything like this. So they had to call upon their staff to come and do all that hard work for them to keep the good times rolling, so to speak. We'll talk a little bit about how many people it made, how many people were required to keep this house going. In the basement, there was also a state-of-the-art gym for the time. There's like parallel bars here. There's all of these pins that people would have like swung around in order to like loosen up their bodies, limber up their bodies, that sort of thing. There's some showers here, but showering was actually a big deal. Can you imagine having dozens of guests in your basement. They're swimming, they're bowling, whatever. People need to be changing. And so there's these fitting rooms. There's this whole long corridor of just these tiny little rooms where your guests could go and change. This is a peek inside one of those rooms. Imagine dozens of guests that are toweling off, and all of a sudden you've got like a laundry crisis on your hands. Lucky for you, there's industrial scale laundry at the Biltmore. They very smartly decided that all of the laundry for the house itself and for all of the staff would be done in this one central space. And there were about 400 people required to run this house. So that's a lot of laundry. And at this point in history, it took about 2 to 3 days just to do like a load of laundry and make sure it dries. So we can see some scrubbing bins here, a lot of places to iron, places to dry things off as well. The head laundress at the Biltmore made New York City wages. She was an expert in starching. She was an expert in how you clean certain kinds of fabrics. And of course, I mean, if you have people like US presidents staying at this house, you want your table linens perfect. You want your bed linens perfect. This is kind of a high pressure job, but I don't know. It might be even more pressure to create a perfect meal for all of these people. You can't just order out. There's nothing close by. You have to have all of the food and the best cooks money can get you available and on call at any second. So there are multiple kitchens in the basement of the Biltmore. Just this range that we see over here is about 7 feet long. There's pantry after pantry after pantry that are room size, so probably bigger than, the largest room in your house, just to store all of the food that was necessary to feed potentially 65 people up in the banqueting hall and anyone else who wants anything at any time of day. Lots of pressure there, right? But this space, this incredible space here, we are looking at a 2-story butler's pantry. This is sort of considered the central nervous system of the house. All the food's been cooked, but then it has to go out on particular china. And if you think about it, back at the end of the 1800s, your china, your crystal, and your silver would be some of the most precious commodities in your house. And if you're a Vanderbilt, you've got the best of the best and you've got multiple sets, some of them dating back 100 years. So all of these things are so fragile and they all have to be accounted for. I can hardly believe that someone had to climb up a ladder in order to access some of these things. So every single thing had to be plated, brought back, cleaned, and then replaced in their designated spot in this butler's pantry. Lots of pressure there. Now, when people think about the Biltmore, they love to think about the holidays at the Biltmore, and to this day, they decorate inside and out to the nines. If you can't make it down to North Carolina for this December, you can watch the Hallmark movie that was filmed there just a couple of years ago, A Biltmore Christmas. And in so many ways, this house continues to inspire people, even beyond the architecture. I think a lot of people are really interested in the people that worked there, the people that lived there over the years. So there's a number of books. The Last Castle really gets into the family that lived there as well. But it's sort of immortalized the house in a whole other direction. But that doesn't mean that the house is invincible, because you all probably remember Tropical Storm Helene from last fall, that sort of freak storm that ripped through the Blue Ridge Mountains, caused extensive damage and flooding, and parts of the Biltmore Estate were completely flooded, like we see here. This is the Biltmore Village, which is about 2.5 miles away from the main house as we know it. But this is the gatehouse. This is the little structure that you drive through in order to get up to that main house that we've been looking at. And you can see all of the damage here. And on the gatehouse, you can see the high water mark from Hurricane Helene last year, or Tropical Storm Helene. So all of these things are still threatened by severe weather, climate change, you name it. So we wrap up on the Biltmore Estate with just a couple of facts about it today. It's still family owned and operated, which is kind of amazing. When you go and visit it, it's it's kept so pristine. You can see that it is still privately owned. Now, even though the amount of land that is owned by or that is incorporated as part of this property has been dramatically reduced. On that land, there are things like hotels and wineries. So even though it took about 400 people to run this property originally, now there's about 2,500 employees that keep this going. And the Biltmore Estate gets about 1 million visitors every year. It's major in terms of tourism to North Carolina. And I have to highly recommend it if you ever get the chance to go down there. But now we are going to trade up the wilds of North Carolina for the subtropical environment of Miami, Florida. We're heading even further south. Let me introduce you to Vizcaya. I think a lot of people have heard of the Biltmore. They might be less familiar with the Vizcaya. Vizcaya, amazingly, is only about 10 minutes away from downtown Miami. This picture stuns me every time I see it. And this is a 34-room Italianate villa. This is a little bit after the Biltmore. This is 1916 to 1922. So we're kind of out of the Gilded Age proper, but in so many ways, it's designed in the Gilded Age spirit and with like Gilded Age money kind of thing. So this is a huge undertaking. It was designed by an architect named F. Burrell Hoffman Jr., certainly not a household name, certainly not somebody at the same level as Richard Morris Hunt. But what we will see is that the building itself, and particularly the interior design, is really quite astonishing. So let's get a little bit, well, we're going to zero in first, actually, on our client, the owner of Vizcaya, the man that made it all possible. Like George Vanderbilt, this is James Deering. And James Deering also commissioned this house and moved into it as a bachelor. He decided to build his dream house, but unlike Vanderbilt, Deering here was in his 50s when he designed this house, and he remained a bachelor throughout his life. Now, James Deering was very successful and very well known in his professional life. In his personal life, he was a little bit more private. He amassed his great fortune from the Harvester um, uh, combine. I think it's a combine company. It's not the James Deere tractors, but it's very similar. So this is James Deering. We don't know, like I said, much about his personal life, but what we do know is that his private secretary described him as probably, quote, the world's oldest and wealthiest bachelor playboy. It gives us a little bit of insight into him. Now, over here on the left is a portrait of Deering at age 44. This was painted by the artist Anders Zorn. That name might be familiar to you because Anders Zorn also painted Isabella Stewart Gardner standing with her arms out like this, that famous painting of her in her museum. Here's a painting of James Deering from about a decade later, a beautiful watercolor painted by none other than John Singer Sargent. Because if you're a wealthy person at this point in history, you have to go to Sargent, right? Now, I just mentioned Isabella Stewart Gardner. Here's two looks at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Vizcaya has been called a cross between the Biltmore and the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And that is in part because of like an interior courtyard space that we'll see in just a moment, but also the fact that the rooms are filled with these historic artifacts and designed kind of loosely around themes too. Now, this close association with the Gardner Museum is all because of this man here. This is Paul Chafflin, and he was this is a portrait of him from about 1916. As a young man, he spent a lot of time with Isabella Stewart Gardner. He spent a lot of time in her museum. You can believe that he kind of internalized her approach to aesthetics and interior design, and he brought that with him to the Vizcaya. Now, Chafflin was pretty distinctive in that he was openly gay at the time. And I think a lot of people go through the Vizcaya sort of imagining that Chafflin and Deering might have had a relationship. But I think we'll see a few things along the way that might suggest that Deering, like his secretary said, had a bustling playboy social life too. So Chafflin and Deering did a lot of research, just like Vanderbilt and his architect did. And originally they were thinking of sort of a Spanish style, which is pretty popular down in Florida. But perhaps because of that Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum influence, Chafflin ended up persuading his client Deering to go with an Italianate villa design. And it looks as though they based their design on a building in Veneto, Italy, over here on the left, that has these prominent towers at all four corners. This is what the Vizcaya looks like today. So we take this Italian theme, even though so much of the Vizcaya was designed with Spain in mind. Deering sort of thought of Vizcaya as like almost like a take on the name Viscano, the idea of like the age of great exploration. Viscano was a prominent explorer from Spain. The house is set on Biscayne Bay. It has these all of these connections back to Spain and Spanish language, but they went with Italian for the design here. In terms of the building of the Vizcaya, this was another exceptional project. It took about 1,000 people again to build this villa. And at the time, the population of Miami was only 10,000 people. So fully 10% of the population of Miami was involved in building this home here. And we can look at it from above. In fact, when the house was originally built, it incorporated more than 100,000 acres. Just like the Biltmore, there was this concept that this would be like a self-sustaining property. So there would be like a little village where all of the employees would live and like be able to farm and produce animals and all of that. Deering imagined that the front of his house was actually the facade that faced the ocean. And he thought that all of his millionaire friends would arrive by boat. So we have to address what is this thing out in the water in front of the house. This is one of the strangest and most fantastic aspects of Vizcaya. This is a 158-foot long breakwater. It does have a specific function. It's there to preserve the house, but it looks kind of like a sunken pirate ship, doesn't it? It's fanciful. It's actually carved with all of these kind of nautical themes here, carved by a sculptor that was actually the father to the famous sculptor Alexander Calder. So the breakwater was designed to look like a boat, and back in James Deering's time, it was sort of another place to have a party. So there's like a little tea pavilion over here. There's all these like full-grown plants as well. But of course, over the years with various storms, it has taken a battering. So it doesn't look quite as grand. But I want you to imagine being a guest of Deering's at the Vizcaya, your boat your boat rolls. Your boat comes up in between the breakwater, the barge here, and the house itself. And one of the first things you're going to see on the facade of Vizcaya is this kind of interesting sundial up here at the top center of the house. And alongside that sundial is this kind of wonderful quote that really sets the tone. It is in Latin, so it translates to gladly accept the gifts of the present hour and abandon serious things. I think you should either get that tattooed or embroider it on a pillow or something. It's a wonderful quote, but it definitely tells you that you're there to have fun, right? So you arrive and then you're going to head inside. For us, though, we are going to float up above the house just for a moment because what we can see sort of hanging out from up above is not only that unusual barge that we saw, but that there's also this glass canopy at the center of the house. Now, this courtyard at the center of the villa was actually open air until I think the 1980s. And it was at that time that they decided that for preservation purposes, they had to enclose it and climate control the house. Can you imagine being right on the ocean like this and having an open air museum? Can you imagine the mold? Can you imagine the corrosion from the salt in the air? I mean, it must have been a conservationist nightmare. Since they enclosed it, I understand they've had to replace that canopy at least once because of severe weather. But we're now going to float down into that courtyard, and we can see this beautiful archway that takes us into this plant-filled courtyard. And you're probably thinking, yep, it's just like the Gardner Museum, isn't it? There's a living heart to this house. And of course, it's Italianate, and you head inside, and of course, it's all this like subtropical plants here, a nod to the environment, and it's a place where you'd want to spend some real time. All of the other spaces kind of spiral off from this central courtyard here. If you're lucky enough to be one of James Deering's guests, he might invite you into his personal library. His library kind of functioned as like a little bit of a reception room too. There's that portrait by Anders Zorn. We can see that there is really elaborate decoration in this room, historic furnishings. We've got a focus on symmetry in the design as well. It's like you don't just get one of something, you have to balance everything out. If you're Deering and you're sitting at this desk, I'm going to offer up a different perspective. There are the books for his library. It's nowhere near as grand as what we saw at the Biltmore, but apparently he had 10,000 books in his collection as well. And because this was only his winter estate, at the end of every season, apparently his staff had to individually wrap those books so that they wouldn't get any mold on them. Now, this is definitely not his entire book collection, because as I understand it, all of the books in this case here are actually fake, because that is in fact a door. So we have our first secret passage at the Vizcaya, and that would take you into another reception room. But that's a nice way to kind of wow people when they first get there. We're going to leap ahead into the biggest room at the Vizcaya. We're only looking at a little corner of it. This is his living room, if you can believe it. This is where you chill out at the end of the day. His living room was also kind of like a banquet hall. It's a Renaissance style room. It's filled with his treasures, his collections that he had amassed through all of his international travels over the years. This was a space not to kick back and relax, but to instead convey to the world that you are cultured and that you are refined. Now, lucky for Deering, he had this artistic director, Paul Chafflin, who was there to help him put all of these things on display. Chafflin had almost like an irreverent sense of design inspired by Isabella Stewart Gardner. So there's like a lot of mix of cultures and time periods here. And I think you sense his irreverence really when it comes to this pipe organ that's at the back of the room. We've got another pipe organ. It's much smaller than what we saw at the Biltmores. Well, Deering and Chafflin felt like the actual pipes of this organ were too visually prominent in the room. And so Chafflin comes up with this idea of like, well, we'll just put a painting in front of the pipe organs or the pipes. And then somebody said, well, we still need access to those pipes though. So Chafflin just said, well, we'll take this historic painting and cut it right down the middle so we can open it up as needed. Would you like to be the person that cuts the Madonna in half here? So he would make adaptations as necessary, and it seems as though he didn't take himself too seriously on any of this. But that's not to say that he and Deering didn't butt heads sometimes. Now, there's all sorts of interesting spaces on the ground floor of the Vizcaya. I want to show you a space that's really just a walkthrough. At one point, it was used as a tea room, but this is just a loggia with these beautiful stained glass windows, these doors that lead out to the garden. And there's just, it's very subtle in their coloring, but you can see over the course of the day, oh, it transforms this room in remarkable ways. Now, imagine walking over to those doors and turning around and looking back into this room. Once again, we get that real fidelity to symmetry in these spaces. Like if you're going to have one torch, you need another on the other side, a chandelier, etc. And throughout the Vizcaya, if you're going to have a door on one wall, you need to have a door on the other, even if that door doesn't actually function. So the only functioning door in this space is this one over here, which I only know because that's the picture where we can see the open door. Um, the other interesting element about this space here is that Deering and Chaplin had bought this gate while they were traveling in Europe, this huge wrought iron gate, and they just loved it. It was too big for the room. So they just decided to borrow space from the floor above it and raise the ceiling just in this room. So again, they adapted as needed. Nothing was really sacred. And I think they had a lot of fun as they were putting all of this together. All right. So from here, I'd like to show you the staircase at Vizcaya. It's nowhere near as impressive as the Biltmore with their 100 steps. This is just a functioning staircase over here on the left. And like at the Biltmore, you didn't even really have to use it. The Vizcaya had a guest elevator and a service elevator. They also had these spiral staircases in the towers on the four corners. And the staircases are like lovely design elements in their own right. These beautiful spirals that sort of look like nautilus shells. They're based on the golden ratio. So it makes for a great photo looking all the way down like that, like we see over here. If you're lucky enough to be invited to stay at the Vizcaya, there are 26 bedrooms in the house. 9 of them were for guests, and Paul Chaplin made sure that each one of those guest bedrooms was decorated to the nines. Each one of the guest bedrooms was sort of named in honor of a different region of Italy. That's not to say that the decorations corresponded to that region, but it made for kind of a fanciful inspiration. In contrast, James Deering's bedroom seems rather austere, actually. It's a neoclassical design. It's a rather small space, relatively speaking. We've got the neoclassical bed here, his 2 large Louis Vuitton trunks, and we're looking at his ensuite bathroom over here on the right. And this element here, this is a shaving stand that's in front of these glass doors. And just to give you a sense of how what a prominent space his shaving stand is. It corresponds to the glass doors that are on the second floor in this balcony over here. It's almost like the highlight of the facade of the building. So that is like primary real estate for his shaving stand. And what I find very interesting is that if you walk out into that balcony, there are like these secret little doors on the side. So going through his bathroom, James Deering could access various guest bedrooms at night. So I think that sort of speaks to that playboy quality that he was known to have in his personal life. As a guest at the Vizcaya, you would probably have your breakfast the following morning, not downstairs, but on the second floor in this exquisite room here that, again, is decorated to the nines with some antique Italian wallpaper on the walls, but then a lot of Asian art here as well. Deering probably took all of his meals in this room. It's a little bit more intimate in scale. Notice that the ceiling isn't that high, in part because this is the space where they borrowed room from up above, down below in the loggia beneath it. Also, another reason to make this like your primary dining room is that the kitchen was actually right next door. Deering made the interesting choice of putting his kitchen on the second floor of his house. And it was a state of the art kitchen. It kind of had to be. Imagine hosting a party and all of your food was one level up. So it required electric dumbwaiters, it required refrigerators. Once everything got downstairs, there was a formal butler's pantry as well that we see here. That's where everything's plated and brought out to your guests. Apparently, Deering didn't want his guests smelling food as they were walking through the house because everybody hates the smell of food, I guess. I don't know. What we see here on display in terms of his china kind of has a fascinating story. He bought some European china for his 80-foot long yacht. It was coming over across the Atlantic and it sank on the Titanic. Can you believe it? So he had to get another order of the same china, and that's what is on view at the Vizcaya today. Kind of amazing. So, if you're at the Vizcaya, if you're a guest, I regret to inform you that there is not a whole recreation complex in the basement. The best we can offer you here is a swimming pool in the basement. And you can see that there's this wonderful grotto like element to it where you're inside and then you can swim outside. And I think this is where it really pops out to me, the stark contrast between the Biltmore and Vizcaya. Like the Biltmore is prim and proper and it's upright, and the Vizcaya is kind of fanciful, it's romantic, it's irreverent, and maybe even a little frivolous. So we've swum outside. Now we're going to head outside. We're overlooking the property again. You can see off to the side, there are these expansive gardens. Here's the little pool where we swam out. We're going to head over to those gardens. Now, he didn't have somebody like Frederick Law Olmsted designing these gardens for him. He found the Colombian-born landscape architect Diego Suarez, who worked some miracles for him. This property has been called the Versailles of America. And if you've ever visited it, you're probably sitting there nodding in agreement. These gardens are absolutely exceptional. And it looks like a relatively small space. It occupies about 8 to 10 acres of just the manicured gardens alone. And sort of like what we saw with the Biltmore, the closer you are to the house, the more tightly and strictly controlled those gardens are. Like these are like little hedge sections that are cropped close to the ground. You have these like direct lines of sight to the house itself. And as you get further away, you can go around these corners where you have these overgrown romantic oaks with their branches and they're covered in moss, and you keep discovering new spaces, new grand promenades, new water features and waterfalls. Every corner, every twist and turn is this incredible view, or it's a fanciful view, like a little hedge maze here, or it's like a place, a little clandestine place to like meet a lover secretly. That's why it reminds me so much of Versailles. It feels like a place where like Marie Antoinette would be running around with the secret lover. There's even a sunken garden with a grotto inside of it. This place just goes on, and around every turn is a breathtaking view. I can't recommend it highly enough. Now, as you move further and further away from the house, you're actually moving up a hill that's called the Mound. So we're sort of at the top of the mound here, looking back at the villa itself. And at the top of that mound, furthest away from the house, is this little outbuilding that they called the casino. Not because there was any gambling happening there, but because it's like casa, it's a little casa casino. So it's just an open air loggia. And because it's so far away from the house, because it's in such a romantic setting, so sort of like where you feel like you aren't being supervised by anything that's happening at the house, you know that this was the site, the destination for so many trysts and parties and that sort of thing. You can make your way over to that casino, and inside on the ceiling is this incredible trompe l'oeil painting, a fool the eye painting, where you look up and it looks as though there are revelers and partiers looking down at you from above. This was painted by a Swiss artist who died shortly after the commission. But there were a number of artists that went to the Vizcaya, including, of course, John Singer Sargent, who got to Miami and decided, I'm going to spend a little time here. So he spent several weeks to a couple of months visiting Vizcaya. Here he's painted that breakwater, that barge. This is inside of the courtyard here. We already saw his portrait of James Deering. And then this is just like a knockout of a watercolor painting. It's one that I always admired because of the exceptional control that he has over this medium. When I look at the way he has filled in this negative space in between these vertical elements in the balustrade here, it's just amazing to me. I have no control when I attempt to do watercolors. This is it's just always dazzled me, and it took me to actually be standing there at the Vizcaya before I realized that famous painting from Sargent was of this particular place. So it was a wonderful feeling for me to be there in particular. So even though this place has been visited by many artists, many other prominent guests have been there too. We have Reagan and the Pope visiting over on the left. And then we have Bill Clinton, who hosted the Summit of the Americas there. Various members of royal families, including Queen Elizabeth, have visited the house during Deering's lifetime. He also had US presidents there and Thomas Edison. And the list goes on because the house is now a real destination for film crews. That is, of course, Frank Sinatra filming his movie Tony Rome there. In recent years, it's been featured in Any Given Sunday, believe it or not, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, Bad Boys 2, and Iron Man 3. It's just such a gorgeous spot that everybody wants to film there. And just like the Biltmore, probably way more so than the Biltmore, it is a place that is completely threatened by severe weather. Located right on the edge of the ocean, you can imagine any major storm threatens this house in dire ways. In fact, the year after James Deering passed away in 1926, there was a major storm that was probably like a category 4 hurricane, and it threw so much salt water onto the landscape they couldn't grow roses in the gardens for years following that storm. This is Hurricane Andrew over here. There's another boat up on the water. Hurricane Irma from 2017 over here on the far right with a jet ski there. So many challenges to preserving this incredible piece of property. It's now one of Miami's most frequently visited cultural destinations. It's just an incredible place. Deering had dozens of staff members there when he was alive, including 26 full-time gardeners. These days, the Vizcaya is run by a staff of about 84. The property was sold to Miami-Dade County back in the 1950s for about $1 million. It needed a lot of restoration back then. It's run as a nonprofit now, and it welcomes about 300,000 people to this property every single year. One of the best parts about visiting is that there are almost always a lot of young girls there for photo shoots for their quinceañeras, their 15th birthdays, and they're wearing the most unbelievable dresses. It's just like this wonderful aspect of visiting Miami in general, but this site in particular. So we're just going to do a quick conclusion to wrap up, a little compare and contrast with these incredible properties at the end. So we've seen these two outstanding examples of Gilded Age architecture, Gilded Age splendor. We've seen innovative design, engineering feats, these vast collections, manicured gardens, and a secret passageway or two. I hope you've enjoyed the virtual tour. Maybe you're thinking about visiting them in person. Thank you so much for spending your evening with me. I'll end there for now, and I welcome any questions or comments you have about the Biltmore and the Vizcaya. I'll start looking at the Q&A right now. Let's see what people are saying. Kathy says, would it be possible to turn the music down? Sorry, Kathy, I don't have any music playing. I'm sorry I missed that. Somebody said, how did George get his wealth? He was a member of the Vanderbilt family, and so he was they were one of the wealthiest families on the planet, mostly from shipping and railroads, but that was generational wealth at that point. Oh, Kathy said my mistake. Okay. Somebody else said, who were the architects of the Chateau Chambord? Good question. I don't have that at the top of my head. Somebody else might be able to jump in with that information. And I believe that was probably a property that was added onto over many generations. Florence says there were 2 Sargent portraits at the Biltmore included. Oh, were they included in the recent Met show? good question. I have not made it to that show. I would be really surprised if the Biltmore lent them. If I'm remembering, somebody who attended might be able to answer that one for us. But it seems like a lot of the Sargent shows are organized around like style and fashion and that sort of thing. And let's face it, the Richard Morris Hunt and Frederick Law Olmsted portraits aren't exactly the most stunning of all of his portraits. Somebody else said, is the Biltmore elevator open to tourists? I believe it is because I've given this program once this month, and somebody told me that they rode in it recently, which I was surprised by. You got to really trust that the maintenance of that elevator. Somebody said, could you please show the picture of the pipe organ at the Biltmore? I'd be happy to. Just a moment. I'm going to give you all whiplash as we head back that way. Let's see. The pipe organ was in the banqueting hall. There it is. And you can see it up there at the top. It's now, I'm not sure if it was originally a player pipe organ, but it's now a player pipe organ. So nobody has to sit there and play it. Somebody says, how long did it take to build the Vizcaya with all the changes done to the building, like the metal gate? Great question. It took about, let's see, about 6 years as well. Although I know James Deering moved in pretty quickly, like before the house was fully finished. And you can imagine those gardens would have taken forever. They actually did import full-sized oak trees to that garden. They invested a lot in it. So maybe they got the bulk of it done pretty quickly, but it sort of dragged on. Nancy Parker says, Jane, do you think that William Randolph Hearst stole a lot of his ideas from the Biltmore? The dining room at the Hearst Castle is almost a replica. Nancy, what a great point. Some of you might be familiar with the Hearst Castle out in California. They do have a medieval dining hall, sort of banqueting hall in the same way. I remember the flags were there too. Um, Nancy, you're the first person to make that association. I don't know for sure if William Randolph Hearst ever saw the Biltmore, but now you've got me thinking, and I think that's I, I think you're onto something, Nancy. I don't see how he could have made his own medieval banqueting hall without seeing this one first. And oh, somebody asked, how much did it cost to build the Vizcaya? Let me see. I do have that in my notes, and I'm sorry I didn't share that before. I think it was roughly $15 million. So that would have been in money from like 1922. I'm sure that translates northward of $150 million today, if I had to guess. Did either house have a music room or a theater? Great question. I know that the Vizcaya had a music room, a lovely little music room. I'm not sure if the Biltmore did. Although, I mean, there were all sorts of spaces that could have purposely served that way. And off the top of my head, I don't think either place had a theater, but if anybody knows differently, please feel free to jump in. It does seem like you should have opportunity for live theater. I could imagine people playing out a little scene right up there on that balcony. How do you keep these huge places clean and fresh looking? Well, great question. You're just like me, practical. We're Yankees here, right? We think, how do you keep them clean? You just hire other people to do it. And when you're richer than rich, that's what you can do, right? When you are a 33-year-old bachelor building a 250 room house, you can afford to pay other people to take care of all of that. But apparently, they still, especially the Biltmore, was apparently still pretty hard to heat. So when Henry James made his fateful trip to that house, that fateful visit, he did talk about, or he wrote about, how it was a difficult place to keep warm. Tish says, did Cornelia Vanderbilt ever write about growing up at the Biltmore? That's a good question, Tish. Off the top of my head, I do not know. I didn't look into that when I was doing my research, but somebody else might know better about that. Thank you for asking the question. That would be kind of the fun sort of upstairs downstairs details too. Somebody else asked, did each homeowner employ art curators for their art objects? Great question. So, like a curator after the fact who's sort of like helping them to maintain these collections. Well, you have the Paul Chafflin character for Vizcaya, who helped him to collect and helped him to install. I'm not sure if he played a role after the fact about maintaining that collection. It seems as though Vanderbilt did a lot of his shopping, um, oftentimes with his architect too. So I'm not sure if he ever had an art expert under his employ. That's a great question. Um, I wish I had a better answer for you, but thank you for asking that. Somebody else asked, I mentioned the Hallmark movie. Did they only film outside the Biltmore facade or did they also film inside? As I understand it, they filmed inside. So, put that as a reminder on your calendar for December 1st when you're ready to like cozy up for the holidays. Cue up your Christmas at Biltmore movie. um, Somebody else asked, the Met Show focused on Sargent's years in Paris. Okay, so then Richard Morris Hunt and Frederick Law Olmsted probably aren't in that show. Thanks for the reminder. Mary Zoll is here. Thanks for joining us, Mary. Can you talk about the village attached to the Biltmore? Is that where the staff lived, rent-free or not? Great question. So I think it's evolved from the original design. So now when you go to the Biltmore, there's like a Biltmore Village, which is like there's a huge winery and there's like hotels and that sort of thing. I don't think that was necessarily, somebody else can correct me on this if I'm wrong, the same area that the staff was living back then. But the staff did have housing on site. Like I said, all the laundry was being done in one area. Um, and I'm not sure if it was rent free or not. These are really important questions to ask, though, Mary. I'm so glad that you do because those dynamics about, how these people were paid and how they were treated really matters. When you go on a tour of the Biltmore, you can see some of the staff rooms. Like so, some of the staff did live in the house proper. A lot of those spaces were in the basement. There were like staff dining rooms there too. I don't know that they had to pay rent. It's a good question. Thank you for the thank you, Chinwei. Uh, and who also asked, was George's family Catholic? Great question. That I don't know either. If somebody knows about those Vanderbilts and their religious persuasion, please let me know. Um, I I'm almost guessing that they were not Catholic because we don't see too much Catholic art in the house. If just as I'm thinking about it, Chloe says I was at the Biltmore in May. Wonderful. Elevator was only for handicapped tourists. Oh, okay. Thanks for the note. So you have to well, it's only open to select few. Somebody else says when visiting the Biltmore, they use the Winter Garden for music. Oh, can you imagine the music in there? That must have been exceptional. Sharon says, Jane, what kind of animal skin do you think is laid out on the dining room floor in the Biltmore? This question is from Nancy Parker's sister. I love that it's a family affair. Thank you so much. Those look like bearskin rugs to me. I'm not sure if if the Vanderbilts hunted them themselves. They look awfully symmetrical. Great question, Sharon. I'm glad you could join us. Somebody else asks, why do you think Vanderbilt wanted such an oversized house? That's the question, right? I mean, we could really do some psychoanalysis on this. Whenever there's a male sort of obsession over the size of things, we could extrapolate a few things. But I think also when you have that much money and you don't feel responsible for anything else in the world, why not spend it on yourself, I guess, is probably his simple answer. Judy asks, there is an exhibit about Richard Morris Hunt at the Preservation Society of Newport County in Rhode Island right now. Judy, thanks so much for offering that up. I didn't even know that. Maybe I can go and see it before it closes. JD says, did the original European owners of the furnishings, fireplaces, etc., ever come and visit and see them in their new location? Great question, JD. Um, as I understand it, I don't think so. When I think about that period in history, particularly like when we think about Isabella Stewart Gardner and George Washington Vanderbilt, they were kind of buying things at a time when a lot of the European aristocracy was kind of selling off their stuff almost at fire sale prices. So I don't get the sense that it was like a cultural trade and like we'll come see it at some point. It was really like we need the money, we're going to sell this. In the early years of the 20th century, or in the first few decades of the 20th century, some of the well, that's a tangent, but that's a really good question. I don't think there was that kind of attachment, but I love that you're thinking about that. It gets me thinking about that. Linda asks, Biltmore Village has a church built by George. Oh, by George Vanderbilt. That's fascinating. Thanks for adding that. Judy says, oh, the Richard Morris Hunt is up through November 2nd, if anybody can get down to Newport before then. Susan asks, any religious rooms in either house? Great question, because we did see at the Gardner Museum her consecrated chapel. I don't know off the top of my head, and I don't think so, that these men had churches in or sacred spaces, consecrated spaces inside their homes. Although this looks like a temple, right? Like the room that we're looking at right now reminds me of the Sistine Chapel in terms of its proportions. So interesting question. And then I think of like James Deering with Vizcaya. I think of Vizcaya as sort of like a pleasure palace for him. So I would really doubt it if he had any sort of sacred space inside that house. But that's a great question too. I'm going to click over to the chat. Thank you again, everybody, for all of these wonderful questions. Got me thinking of these houses in different ways. Let's see. Thank you for the very kind words. Oh, Teresa says she's toured the Ringling Estate, another great site. I would have included it if we had all of the a little bit more time. And somebody else, Kathy says the Villa Farnesina. I'm not familiar with that one, but thanks for sharing that in. Some of you might have heard of the Ringling Museum, which is in Sarasota, Florida. Add that to your list of things to do if you want to like drive all around Florida, which my husband and I did for our anniversary last year. We went and visited these places. The Ringling Estate, the house that they have there is pretty interesting too. Sort of pales in comparison to a place like the Biltmore, but fascinating in its own right. Let's see here. I'm just going to go through some of these. Very, very, very nice comments, everybody. Thank you so much. Suzanne says, how do I get my pictures for the PowerPoints? You know, for this program, I was a little stressed that there wouldn't be good images available online, and I bought so many books. And then as I was putting everything together, I realized that the Biltmore has a fantastic website, and most of these images are already available online. The Vizcaya, like you had to do some deeper dives to find some of those rooms, but you can nail it down. I wanted so badly to like show you, you know, the secret passage in his library, but we couldn't. I just couldn't get those particular images. But thank you for thinking about how I get the images. Most of them, surprisingly, were available online. Let's see. Oh, Chloe asked, oh, yeah, that was the question about the elevator. I think we covered the cost of Vizcaya. Oh, wow. So Ada says she was at the Vizcaya and saw a wedding set up. I can only imagine there are a lot of great wedding pictures of the Vizcaya if you were to follow them on social media. Unbelievable place to have an event. We should all be so lucky. Cornelia Vanderbilt did have children. She gave birth to her two kids in the same room that she was born in. Stephen, thanks for being here. He says people like to visit Biltmore at the holidays, but I think it's more stunning without the seasonal decorations. You know, I could see it both ways, Stephen, but I think you're onto something. You know, it's like that's almost like a visual clutter that could hinder your appreciation of everything that went into the house. Let's see here. Oh, Betty. Betty got to the Biltmore shortly after I did because I just missed the Chihuly glass sculptures. Yes, they always have a big exhibition on view too. I think right now they might have like replicas of items from King Tut's tomb, but the Chihuly, that would have been amazing to see. Beth asked a great question. Were Vanderbilt and Deering related? As far as I know, no, Beth, but great question. And I'm not even sure that Deering ever went to Biltmore, to be honest, but he did have that art director that was very familiar with the Gardner Museum, which seemed to dictate a lot. Now, all of these people ran in similar circles. So, I mean, they were all hiring John Singer Sargent to paint their portraits. They all knew of each other's architects and all of this. So it was a small world and a pretty connected world at that time. So even if you hadn't gone to that house or you hadn't met that specific person, you were probably pretty well familiar with what they had done, if that makes any sense. I was reading like one of these fascinating books about the Vizcaya, and it was just like, I mean, all of these people that were involved in like the Cornish colony in New Hampshire had these ties down to Vizcaya. It was like incredible. It was such a small world. Um, Thanks for your kind words, Mary. I appreciate it. Mary Lynn says, is Anderson Cooper basically going to inherit a lot of what his mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, should have inherited from the wealthy part of her married life? Where, when did they break up? How does Anderson benefit from being gay direct with his, um, you know, these are all very interesting questions. And I don't know enough about Anderson Cooper's lineage to know, I don't know if he's inheriting anything. He seems to strike me as somebody who wants to stand out on his own, but who would ever deny a great inheritance, right? So I don't know too much about that, but thank you for asking. You might get some people going down the rabbit hole on that one. JD, it's true. They worshiped money, right? The money was money was all of it. And I have such conflicted feelings about this because when I look at this like excessive wealth and how it was spent, my heart breaks for the all of the causes that could have been addressed with this kind of wealth. But at the same time, at least all of the beauty that they created is still available for us to enjoy today. That's like the silver lining on all of this. These people did worship money, and at least we get to sample it in our own way and appreciate that beauty. Sarah says, I love that the Sargent portraits of the Hunt and Olmsted are in front of the architecture. Oh, yes, right. Like they're integrated into the spaces that they designed. That's such a wonderful element. Villa Farnesia in Rome. Okay, I guess I got to go to Rome, Kathy. Thanks for adding that in. Um, Adair went to camp at Swananoa as a child, and they took us on tours of Biltmore. Wow, I can't imagine doing that as a camper. I'm sure you were awestruck. Alice says, what's under the pipe organ? I don't know, Alice. It looks like some like displays. It almost looks like I'm not sure what these vessels are made out of. I'm not sure. It doesn't look like pottery, maybe some sort of like brass vessels, perhaps? I'm not sure. Good question. Andrea says the Vanderbilt inheritance was depleted by Gloria's lifetime. She created the clothing line for income. There is no Vanderbilt money left for Anderson. Oh, no wonder he has to be his own man. Thanks for adding that in. And oh, I'm glad that Adair, this was a nice callback to those memories. Carla mentions the Crane Estate in Ipswich. It also has a 2 stories butler's pantry. Doesn't that just seem like not great design? I guess it worked for somebody. Um, Mary makes the great comment too that there was a lot of wealth, but a lot of people to hire too, so they could employ a lot of people. Um, I love how we're going down the Anderson Cooper rabbit hole here. Those oh yeah, so these shelves, Margot makes a great point that these 3 cases here would have like been like a counterpoint to the 3 fireplaces at the other end of the room. Margot, either you know this house very well or you have a photographic memory. Janet says, I was at Vizcaya Mansion. Oh, did the at the Vizcaya in 1963 when it was still open to the air. That must have been magnificent. My mother always likes to think about, what all these historic places must have been like when you could open a window. That must have been very special, Janet. And then David said, did the Biltmore Mansion get flooded during Helene? Fortunately, no. Other parts of the estate did, but not the mansion itself. It was, as I understand it, completely untouched. Oh, Margot, wow. well, then you do have a good memory. If tonight was your first introduction to it, now you have to go there. Thank you, everybody. I think we got through all of the chat. It's always such a pleasure. I always look forward to the last Thursday of the month. I'm happy to say that we are continuing on all through 2026 too. I have the topics for those programs already listed on my website as well. So that is iamculturallycurious.com. You can go to the programs page, and we'll be back next month. We'll be looking at the artwork of MC Escher. So that should be a lot of fun. Oh, Janice, thank you so much for your kind words. This is such a fun night for me. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in a month. I look forward to it. Take care, everybody.